Welcome to SciTech Culture with Steve Kern and Ben Warner, where we examine science, technology, and culture in the 21st century. Visit our website at scitechculture.com.
Hello and welcome to SciTech Culture. My name is Ben Warner and I'm joined once again by my good friend and colleague Steve Kern. How are we today, Steve? Had the week off last week, but we're still in the same predicament. Social distancing and working from home and all these other lovely things that are part of daily life now. Although, interestingly, which we'll talk about later, seems like we may be getting closer to some relaxation of those restrictions.
Yes, we might be. It's now winter though, so who actually wants to go outdoors anyway? we just hibernate for 6 months and come back out in summer.
Yep, suits me. Absolutely suits me. So before we get on to some more discussion, we've got tech, I guess, to talk about in the sense of the COVID Safe app and pandemic drones and all that. So it's good that we can sort of connect technology with the coronavirus. But one thing I did want to just briefly touch on was my experience with LumaFusion editing one of our episodes, and so I took the footage from our last episode and put it into LumaFusion on the iPad, and was pretty successful at replicating the workflow and pretty much getting it almost close to what it was. It just kind of let me down only in the sense that there were two filters that I applied to the audio to really make the audio stand out a lot more, and that function simply wasn't available in the LumaFusion app. But I mean, really, between that and the concept of maybe even trying to use the iPad to record the podcast, which I think is actually something we should try at some point. It's really fascinating. I'm really taken with this, the form factor and the fact that you could do this. And something that we mentioned briefly before we got on, it kind of puts into question for me laptops like the MacBook Air, for instance, because the MacBook Air is not really good for the more processor intensive and graphic intensive apps like video editing, photo editing, or serious gaming or anything like that. So if you're going to buy that device, to me the iPad would make more sense with a keyboard, because even though you might not get the Mac OS full experience on it, the benefits you get from using a tablet I think outweigh it and would make more sense in that respect. And if you then needed the laptop, you should just get the MacBook Pro or equivalent laptop.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, I don't know. We've commented on many things around this. Apple's got a lot of products at the moment. I mean, I wouldn't even know where to begin, but certainly the AirBook, that was a promise of really, well, maybe in some ways it was really just the precursor to the iPad all those years ago when it first came out. Lightweight, a little bit lighter on, but, enough to do a little bit of, Microsoft Office style work. So now I really don't know where it sits. But what you're making the iPad Pro sound is like a really exciting tool now. And it was only a couple of years ago we were lamenting it didn't seem to have much to offer beyond just being a browser and an app game playing device. But now this is really revolutionising the future. And if this keeps going this way, maybe even the MacBook Pros sort of under threat to some extent.
Exactly. And just quickly needed to touch on the iPhone SE, which they managed to release in the middle of a pandemic, which they're always good at doing. And although, arguably there's still some expense involved, it's actually probably the best sort of deal for the average everyday person wanting to buy into the Apple ecosystem, because even though it's an old form factor, the internals are really top notch and the latest and greatest, effectively. So I can imagine that they're going to be selling millions of these.
Do we know the price in Australian dollars? Is it $750 to $800?
I think it's somewhere around that. So
that's very good value for a phone that, potentially, if you're not a phone snob, which you probably aren't if you're getting the SE, you'll probably get 4 years out of it.
Yeah, exactly. And it just goes to show that I think devices today are that good that you could get something like that and it really does satisfy all of your needs really, and all you're buying with the more expensive models is just some extra bells and whistles at this point, rather than like big leaps between the two.
That's right. So yeah, I think I'm really excited by the iPhone SE, and who knows, that might be enough to get me back across the line.
Well, we'll wait and see what happens with that. All right, let's transition over to the COVID Safe app that the Australian government released, and fascinating stuff. It's good to we can talk about the tech and all that sort of stuff. The fact that it's there, but it's interesting that I guess maybe if we start on the privacy angle, there was a lot of feedback that a lot of people are concerned about, the government having access to your information through this app, or it's uploading to the cloud, or whatever it is that it's doing. There's a lot of, if you go through the fact about how it works, what I would push back against that sort of commentary with is by saying, well, you're upset about this, but you're perfectly happy to upload just about everything to Facebook, Google, and whatever other cloud service. So I don't really understand where people are coming from with that.
Well, the app has been designed so basically you have to have Bluetooth on, you have to have the app installed, and the other phone has to have their Bluetooth on and the app installed, and then it will log on your phone all the pings from people within range, and they need to be within range too. It's not like anywhere in a 1 kilometre radius or anything like that. So it is actually a very private app, and a lot of the privacy fears are completely unfounded. It's been well designed and well thought through. But I'll be a bit provocative here. Why haven't governments pushed Google and Facebook especially to release their data about what they can detect? Because then we wouldn't need to download a government app. Facebook should hand over all the data that it knows about people and their proximity to other Facebook users.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I've downloaded and installed it, so I'll let you know how it goes. But again, it's all silent, so it's probably not. And touch wood, I don't encounter anyone or don't contract it or have to upload any more information in relation to that. But yeah, I don't see any problem with it.
I think what's interesting about it is it shows how serious a secondary outbreak is, or the threat of it is. And, we'll be right back here again if there is an outbreak and we can't trace it. So, it seems maybe for some people that the government's being heavy-handed, but if we don't want to go on like this for, a year or 18 months or something like that, then this is the way to work through it. So It's a tricky situation, but all of this is new to everyone, and we've just got to make the best of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Just extrapolating further from that, I was reading this other article on the ABC website about a pandemic drone, which sounded a little bit more insidious to me. The idea being that
straight up
that these drones can fly into public areas and then just instantly be able to detect body temperatures and report back heart rates, all this sort of stuff. And it's like, yeah, okay, maybe they can table that for the time being. And I don't know if, not that I'm an expert on the technicalities of this, or whether or not it would actually work. Is it good enough to do all of that?
A Terminator sort of thing here, honestly, because you start off and then you just say, we'll do a bit of policing like that, and then the next thing everyone's a criminal.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Because it's like, what are you doing? So, whereas the app's got like a very specific channeled purpose, this, couple of tweaks to the programming, and then all of a sudden it's doing something else. Or whether or not, that could be hacked or broken into to adjust what it's doing by nefarious characters too. But it's just, when I read this, I just thought, too many options, and we don't have to do all of these things.
No, that's right. But I think, situations like this always lead to a bit of opportunism from all sorts of quarters. So, I think we have to, as a society, we have to understand our need or our obligation to work through this pandemic, but we shouldn't be too far on either side of the fence. So we should accept government apps that are reasonably designed to get a reasonable outcome versus just crazy talk.
Yeah, exactly. And just finally, just moving away now from some of the tech stuff, this idea of wastage in the current environment. So that sort of consumerism / wastage type issue that we're facing, and obviously there was a lot of panic buying, etc. Supermarkets made it pretty clear they weren't going to accept any returns on any of that stuff, and it would appear some of that has ended up just being thrown out because obviously they couldn't get it used, particularly if it was anything with a use by date on it or whatever. And it just and then it goes all the way up to things like the plastic waste in the maybe the PPE and stuff like that, just how that's all managed. And although it's hard given the speed at which this pandemic has sort of hit us with, to be able to respond to this sort of thing, because the immediate need is to take care of people's health and whatever. I know there's sort of two elements to that, but it would seem that there's an issue in terms of our own personal responsibility for that sort of stuff, and also that sort of broader, how do we handle all of this at a more, I guess, I don't know if you call it government level or whatever, that has to figure out a system to deal with it all.
Well, that's right. This is, I thought this was actually a bit of a nothing story. There probably is a problem with this PPE waste at the moment, but whether it's coffee cups, whether it's bottled water or bottled drink, whether it's PPE that's been discarded, we've got a huge problem with waste in this world, and the biggest problem is that we're using what is now an antiquated system to produce these plastic products, and we don't have an alternative. But the chemistry is there, but industrially, it's very hard for us to make recyclable products at this stage that are cheaper than these nasty plastic products. So we either all, as a community, once again, it's no different to downloading the government's COVID app. We need to make a conscious decision. We can rely on government regulation, and I think governments have done a pretty good job. Maybe not enough, but you could argue, but I think at least they're moving this way to ban plastics. But we as consumers just have to stop buying the packaging. That's just where it starts. You can ask for bans, but we can just stop buying packaging now. And that's the same for PPE, with plastic bottles or anything else. And that's the most important thing in reducing plastic waste. When it comes to the PPE products, we don't have any option at the moment. I think, and it's unfair to single this out because people are trying to protect themselves and do the right thing.
And that's the priority, of course. And just finally, just before we wrap up, there was one other story that I'll be springing on you just now. It's just in the retail sector, when we eventually go back to some sort of normal where the products are things that you try, like, so for instance, clothing, et cetera, et cetera. I actually was having a discussion about this with someone this week. How's that actually going to work in an environment where we're being encouraged to not touch anything? And is it like you try on a shirt and then it's got to be cleaned afterwards? We're going to, I know that's, it's just an interesting problem that may present itself when shops reopen.
Well, that's a curly one to throw out there, Ben, but it's a great question. It's, what do you do? Right from the start, people have said there will never be the normal that there was before. I think, if everyone from, maybe economists or finance people right through to the general public are kind of thinking that once the bans are lifted, everything will go back to normal. But this is a great example of maybe they won't. All it would take is 1 in 5 people no longer to be comfortable to try on a shirt that someone else might have tried on. Yeah. And things will change. They have to change. Yeah. So does it just mean that you then suddenly get a big boost in online and retail outlets are no longer the place to go? who knows?
Absolutely. It's something that we will no doubt see in the coming months as things start to roll back. All right, we might wrap it up there. A couple of different things we covered there, and I'm sure we'll keep going with it. The interesting date coming up for us is May 11, I believe, although May 8, I guess, was what the Prime Minister was alluding to in terms of the easing of some of the restrictions. So perhaps we can talk about that next time and see what it means and what the impact potentially is.
Well, that's right. I mean, I think, people shouldn't expect too much. It'll be stuff like, you can gather again, but, you'll have to be 1.5 metres apart. Yeah. And, there'll probably be someone walking around with a ruler to make sure that you maintain that distance.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so don't forget our website, SciTechCulture.com. You can get all of our links and content there. You can subscribe to our Vimeo and YouTube channels, our RSS feeds, and you can watch or listen to us on any and all of your devices, and we greatly appreciate you visiting our website. All right, so that's it for this episode. We'll catch you next time.